Hi everybody, want to talk to you today about the Harley Benton CST 24 Deluxe, and I just happen to have had one in this week for service. It's still with its factory setup because the owner hasn't actually played it a great deal. He's had it since the beginning of 2020 I think, but hasn't really had much chance to play it. Now, the construction of the guitar is a three-piece mahogany neck with a bound, what looks like rosewood fingerboard, but I suspect isn't. It's maybe a little bit redder than that, so it's a substitute species, but it looks very, very nice. It's nice and dark, and it has a kind of warm look to it. It's got some locking tuners on the headstock and a volute on the back here to try and prevent some of the more obvious breaks that you get with these tilted headstock guitars. The body is also mahogany, but it looks like it's got a photo flame finish or maybe a maple veneer. It's all finished off in this nice translucent red lacquer. The body is also bound and the binding is actually laid in very nicely, and the fit and finish of the guitar does look very good. It's got two humbuckers in there. To me, they sound probably like an Alnico 5 humbucker. They've got that slightly sharp upper mid-range that you'd expect from something like an Alnico 5. Is very reminiscent of something like the SE PRS 24s, but it has a more Fender-like saddle, you know, a modern Fender saddle, which is the square blocky ones. Perfectly serviceable, perfectly usable. So that's the good stuff. Fit and finish looks really, really nice. Pickups are okay, they're balanced nicely, they're tonally quite pleasant. There's nothing here to worry about in a guitar at this kind of value, £250. So that's the good. What about the bad? Well, for me, there were two things that really stuck out. The first is that it has got a Biflex truss rod, but the factory setup seemed to be utilising it in a pushed forward position. Now that's a little unusual. You shouldn't really be seeing that in a guitar coming out of the factory. And in fact, it pushed forward, but didn't push forward particularly evenly, and was causing a very, very slight twist in the neck as well. But the real ugly is why it came from the factory set up that way. And that was because it's quite possibly one of the worst fret jobs I've seen in a very, very long time. Now, it's a Chinese-made guitar, and we know that they had a lot of labour shortages in early 2020, and we also know that there was a massive, massive glut of guitar sales in mid-2020, which meant there was a lot of demand for increased throughput. And the problem here is, I think, that quality control has basically gone missing, and I've seen this quite a lot with lockdown era guitars. A lot of the frets were not in the neck, or at least not in the neck properly. Now, I'm sure they're using a machine which presses the frets in with an even pressure. But of course, wood in itself is not exactly uniform, and some of the frets are simply just resisted being pushed in a little bit and were poking up in the middles. That meant that there was a lot of choking out, a lot of bending, and in fact the truss rod being adjusted forward was simply to overcome some of the fret rattle and unevenness that was coming from the lower frets. Now, once I banged all these frets into the neck with my fretting hammer, gone back down the sides and took off the sharps that I'd, obviously as you push the fret this way, the ends poke out. Once we got rid of all that, suddenly you're playing with a very, very different guitar. And then once I'd fret dressed it and given it a real good fret polish, suddenly the guitar is a totally different animal. From being largely unplayable with an action that was totally undesirable, now the action's low and even, and the neck, it's a nice round shape. It gives you something to get your hand around. It's wide enough that you're not going to lose the strings off the edge of the fingerboard either. Gives you a lot of room to play with. And it overall feels very, very pleasant to play now. So, what's the overall conclusion? Well, at £250, which is roughly what these were and what the successor model seems to be, if the frets are good, it's actually not bad at all. You know, it's really good value for money. Now, if you're looking at one of these on the second-hand market and it hasn't been looked at by a luthier, I'd probably allow yourself a little bit, especially if you're distance buying. So say if it was coming in at £175 or £200 second-hand, I'd be looking to spend probably something between, say, £75 and £100 on it to get it fret dressed, set up, have all its little problems and niggles taken out of it. Now, of course, that might not be necessary, but I think you ought to factor it in. And if you do that, I actually think you end up with what is really a pretty good guitar. It's well constructed, it's well finished. Yes, there's some flaws in it, but they're not game changers, and you can get over them. And even if you do come across some problems with something like a tuner, they're all standard size holes. You can take out the locking tuners and put a standard set of tuners in there from Goto for £35 or £40 and still end up with a very good and very well constructed guitar. Anyway, thanks very much for watching, and I hope to see you all next time.